Welcome to the Eden Podcast, where we think again about the Bible on women and men, and we start with the correct understanding of what happened in the Garden of Eden, back in the beginning. Today we'll be hearing from Bruce C.E. Fleming. He's a former academic dean and professor of practical theology. The work of the Tru 316 Foundation is based on the research of Dr. Joy Fleming, who wrote the book Man and Woman in Biblical Unity, Theology from Genesis 2 to 3. Listeners like you are joining us as members of the Tru 316 Foundation and support the work to true the verse of Genesis 3:16 and the 7 key passages on women and men. It turns out, when Genesis 3:16 becomes clear, all the other passages become clear too. You can learn more at our website, tru316.com. That's TRU316.com. And at the end of this episode, we'll tell you about a special gift we have for new members. And now, enjoy today's episode of the Eden Podcast.
On the last episode of Season 9, titled Joy Story, I interviewed Dr. Joy Fleming as she recounted how God led her to study Genesis chapters 2 and 3 for her doctoral dissertation at the University of Strasbourg, France. If you'd like to get a copy of her dissertation, visit our website at tru316.com/shop. After teaching in French-speaking Africa as professor of Old Testament studies, when we returned to the States, she was asked to condense her 407-page dissertation for the average reader. She did, and it appeared as her book, Man and Woman in Biblical Unity, Theology from Genesis 2 to 3. We're serializing that book for Season 10 on the Eden Podcast. Genesis 3:16b. Having spoken of conception or pregnancy in 3:16a, the Lord God goes on in 3:16b to talk about her now mortal body. God gives an informative description of a mortal body to the woman. Later, in the speech to the man, verse 19, God will explain that the man will continue for a limited time to eat the food God made for sustenance, but will ultimately return to the dust from which God created him. But first, to the woman, God's words help prepare her to anticipate what the future will be like with a mortal body. God explains to her that bearing children will now take place with effort or labor. The Hebrew word etzev is a general word and is used in other places in the Old Testament, not once with reference to childbirth. The woman's effort in childbirth after Eden is not due to any kind of a curse God placed on her, as some think. Rather, it is because, having chosen disobedience and therefore death, her body is subject to effort in the course of childbirth. This information about bearing children is conveyed in line B of Genesis 3:16, where God is not a direct agent bringing about the action, as in 3:16a, but is describing for her in some detail the new world in which death and mortal bodies must be reckoned with. Such information would be valuable to know before the first time she gives birth, which does occur in Genesis 4:1. For without it, never having experienced such effort or labor, she might mistake the onset of the birth process for the pain of her own imminent death. When translations render both of the Hebrew words itzabon and etzev with the English word pain, they make God seem to stutter. They make it seem that God is saying the same thing twice. They give their readers 2 lines of similar or the same negative news to the woman. They arrive at this by changing effort to pain and infusing that idea back into line A. Consider these translations of Genesis 3:16a and b. New International Version: I will make your pains in childbearing very severe. With painful labor you will give birth to children. New Living Translation: I will sharpen the pain of your pregnancy, and in pain you will give birth. These mistranslations and others like them make a complex blend of elements that are in the text with elements that are not in the Genesis text. Ignoring the meaning of itzabon, sorrowful toil to work the ground which the Lord God will curse, and heron, conception or pregnancy, they conflate elements from 3:16b with missed subtle but significant nuances of meaning in 3:16a to arrive at a garbled version of what the text is actually saying. Also, their readers end up missing the happy news that the woman is learning from God, that she will have more than one child, children. Genesis 3:16a and b can more accurately be translated from Hebrew as follows. I will greatly multiply your sorrowful toil as you work the ground I'm about to curse, and I will greatly multiply your conception, offspring, who will crush your enemy. With effort, you will give birth to children. Genesis 3:16c and d. Having spoken of God's action upon her life, I will greatly multiply your toil and your conception, and having described what the experience of life with her mortal body will be like, in effort you will give birth to children, God next describes what life will be like with her partner in a world where people are now good and evil. God's 4 last words to the woman describe life in a world of sin. Your desire shall be for your husband, but he shall rule over you. These final words to the woman do not resemble the endings of the other 2 speeches. There is no shoof, shoof, bruise, bruise, shuv, shuv, return, return, equivalent, the alliterative repeating verbs that ended those 2 speeches. There are 2 parties in Genesis 3:16c and d, but their relationship is not reciprocal. The author uses form to convey content in describing a relationship which is an awkward misfit. The words and the word order in the Hebrew text are freighted with meaning. A very literal rendering of the Hebrew would be, and to man your, desire your, line C, and he will rule over you, line D. Prepositions to and over begin and end 3:16c and d. They are unreciprocal, neither to nor over-under, and incompatible. The dominant position that the man will assume is hinted at by his prominent place in the syntax. Man, he, opens each line in Hebrew. The woman's presence in the syntax becomes almost a footnote. Pronoun suffixes at the end of each line, your, you. In the first line, there is no verb in the Hebrew text. Translators supply a verb such as is or will be. A noun is attributed to the woman, a verb to the man. Some commentators have sought to color the noun desire with a negative connotation. But desire, teshuka, simply means desire. The word is used 3 times in the Old Testament. In Song of Solomon 7:10, teshuka is used of Solomon's desire for his lover. I am my beloved's, and his desire is for me. There is no negative connotation to desire for his lover, and teshuka is not necessarily a sexual term because it is used in a non-sexual way in Genesis 4:7. The aggressive adversarial verb describing the action of the man, quote, rule over, stands in marked contrast to the affection of the noun attributed to the woman in the preceding line. In the context of Genesis 2 and 3, it seems that God is essentially warning the woman that though her desire for her husband continues to be as it had been when they were enjoying an unimpaired one-flesh communion, unfortunately things will henceforth be different. The man has changed dramatically. This was already manifest in his new role as accuser of God and the woman. It will be further manifest in his subsuming a new role as ruler over the woman. Rather than cleaving to his wife in a face-to-face partnership, he is about to rule over her. This stands in contrast to the woman, the object of whose desire is, as before, her husband. Instead of ruling together over the animals as they used to do, he is about to subsume her under his rulership along with the animals. This would be an expression of the independence he had declared from God. His new kingdom would be her. In so doing, he would take the place of God and claim to be her new Lord. As Carol Castor Howard puts it, the woman wants a mate, and she gets a master. She wants a lover, and she gets a lord. She wants a husband, and she gets a hierarch. This is the clear meaning of Genesis 3:16. It is important to note that unlike Genesis 3:15, where the enmity between the serpent and the woman was established by God, these words about man's governing intentions are not prescriptive, for God never instructs the man to act in such a way. God's words are descriptive of the broken harmony that the woman is about to encounter. Episode A', Part 3, Out of Eden, Genesis 3:20-24. It is noteworthy that when God's speeches conclude, 14 through 19, the next recorded event is the naming of Eve by the man. Nowhere does God mandate such an assignment or vest him with authority over her, But then, for the man, God is out of the picture, and the man takes things into his own hands. Though God's name for both members of the one flesh pair is Adam, the man's naming of the woman highlights the man's severing of their unity. Now they will have two names, and will be two separate entities. What God warned the woman of in 3:16 is already taking place, and the two steps the man has taken toward sovereignty over his own domain, described above, find culmination in this act of sovereign authority. God had authority over both the man and the woman, whom God saw as a unity and as equal partners in every respect. God directed the two humans to be co-regents in ruling the animal world God created for them. Earlier, we pictured this as a triangle with God at the top point and with the man and the woman on the bottom line at either end. Arrows went down from God to the humans because he rules over them. Additional arrows went back and forth between the man and the woman who interacted with one another as co-regents of the created realm. Sin disrupted the harmony God intended. This changed the situation, which could be pictured having the man at the top of a line ruling over the woman below him. Both the man and the woman are on one side of a vertical line with God off to the side in the picture. God and his authority were rejected. The man seized power for himself and subsumed the woman into his kingdom with radically different authority structures. There is a sin barrier between the humans and their rightful Lord. Sovereignty and relationships are turned topsy-turvy. Phyllis Tribble describes the reversal this way. At the point of disobedience, distinctions within one flesh became oppositions. Division followed, yielding opposite sexes. To defend himself, the man Ha-Adam turned against the woman and betrayed her to God in Genesis 3:12. Yet according to God, she still yearns for the original unity of male and female. For your man, Ish, is your desire, Teshukah. Alas, however, union is no more. One flesh is split. The man will not reciprocate the woman's desire. Instead, he will rule over her. Thus, she lives in unresolved tension. Where once there was mutuality, now there is a hierarchy of division. The man dominates the woman to pervert sexuality. Hence, the woman is corrupted in becoming a slave, and the man is corrupted in becoming a master. His supremacy is neither a divine right nor a male prerogative. Her subordination is neither a divine decree nor the female destiny. Both their positions result from shared disobedience. God describes this consequence, but does not prescribe it as punishment. The remainder of this episode describes the pair's departure from the garden. It corresponds directly to the opening verses of the story, episode A, when the man was first placed in the garden. Throughout these verses, other previous episodes are also alluded to by a variety of references. For example, the man named the woman, 3:20, as he named the animals in episode C. God graciously clothed both the man and the woman, 3:21, though they at one time had been naked and not ashamed, episode D. God's words of 3:22 allude to the following: the two trees he had made in episode A, the serpent's terminology when he promised in episode C' that they would know good and evil, and the act of eating, committed in episode B', forbidden in episode B. In 3:23, the man is sent out of the garden and returns back to the ground from which he was taken, episodes A and A'. The guardian of episode A is banished, and the tree of life is guarded in 3:24. Chapter 4, Conclusion. Genesis, the book of beginnings, has much to tell us about God, the universe God created, and the human beings who graced the planet Earth. Chapters 2 and 3 tell the story of the Garden of Eden. The first human couple enjoyed its beauty and bounty. But the tragic part of the story is that the rebellion subverted what God had intended, adding evil to a world God had made good. Life on this planet goes on, with death and evil even now still at work. Yet God began at that early point to unfold a plan of hope for the fallen human race. We have examined the account of the Garden of Eden, seeking to learn what God intended and how sinful disobedience disrupted it. Based on our exegetical research, we have seen the original unity of man and woman in the creation. God's authority structure was three-tiered. God rules over, the human beings, man and woman, who in turn rule over nature, including its animal inhabitants. Tragically, humankind has sought to subvert God's plan. In the rebellion, man stood the established authority structure on its head, banishing God from his rightful place of dominion and usurping authority to rule over the one who had been created as his co-regent and counterpart. It is a sinful attempt to be lord over a realm which is to be under God's lordship only. A four-tiered hierarchic program of God, the man, the woman, and nature was not part of God's plan, either in creation or subsequent to the fall. This new scheme of things is the notion of a fallen race. We have not addressed all possible questions relating to differences in the genders in Eden or after, but the Genesis text does not address all such questions either. One thing that has become clear from our careful study of the text, however, is that some doctrines popularly held and persuasively defended must be abandoned. On a positive note, from our years of study and research, there has emerged a clearer vision of the Lord God who creates and who gives, who teaches and exhorts, who seeks and restores. It is amazing that the Creator should have given so much to one woman and one man. It is even more awe-inspiring to discover with what respect and love He sought to deal with them in their disobedience.
Thanks for listening to the Eden Podcast, brought to you by the members of the Tru 316 Foundation. Research into the Old and New Testaments by Dr. Joy Fleming and Reverend Bruce C.E. Fleming forms the base of all our work. Joy is a former Old Testament professor and is a practicing licensed psychologist. Bruce is the author of the Eden Book series, which starts with Book 1, the Book of Eden, Genesis 2-3. We invite you to become a donor member of the Tru 316 Foundation, as together we seek to true the verse of Genesis 3:16 and related passages. When you become a member, we'll send you an autographed copy of the Book of Eden. Sign up today by going to tru316.com/member. That's TRU316.com/member.